Marcus Chen stepped off the shuttle and immediately felt out of place in the crystalline palace of Velshara, where everything sparkled, like diamonds under 3 suns that hung in the purple sky and made the whole world glow with colors he had never seen before on Earth, where the sky was just blue and boring compared to this alien wonderland that stretched before him. The human delegation moved as a tight group through corridors that seemed to be carved from living crystal that pulsed with soft light. And Marcus wondered if the Vel built these structures, or if they grew them somehow, because nothing looked like it had been constructed the way humans built things back home, with metal and concrete and sharp angles. Ambassador Rodriguez walked at the front with her shoulders squared and her face set in what she probably thought was a diplomatic expression, but Marcus could see the tension in her jaw because this mission mattered more than anything humanity had ever attempted, and everyone knew it, even if nobody said it out loud during the 6-month journey to get here. They entered the grand reception hall, where hundreds of beings from dozens of species filled the space, and Marcus felt his stomach twist because he had studied the files and watched the videos. But nothing prepared him for actually seeing aliens. Up close, where some had scales and others had feathers, and some seemed to be made of liquid metal that moved like mercury in a bottle. The Vel themselves stood tall and elegant, with skin that shifted colors like mood rings. Marcus remembered from childhood, and their faces were almost human, but not quite, with eyes that were too large and too bright, and features that were beautiful in a way that made his brain struggle to process what it was seeing. Then the Emperor entered, and everyone fell silent and bowed, and Marcus bowed too, because that was protocol, even though humans did not bow to anyone anymore after the corporate wars taught them that no one deserved that kind of automatic submission. The Emperor spoke in a voice that somehow Marcus understood, even though he knew the alien was not speaking English, but rather the translator implant in his skull was doing its job in converting the sounds into words his brain could process in real time. The speech was formal and polite and said nothing of substance about the treaty that would determine if Earth became a partner or a puppet in this massive empire that controlled more star systems than humanity had cities, and Marcus tried to pay attention, but then he saw her. Princess Lyraseth stood beside the throne with skin that glowed soft blue like bioluminescent algae. Marcus had seen in ocean documentaries, and she wore something that might have been a dress or might have been living fabric that moved on its own, and her eyes were the color of violets, and when those eyes met his, Marcus forgot to look away. She was stunning in a way that crossed species boundaries and made his artist brain catalog every detail, from the way light played across her features to the intelligence that burned behind her gaze. And he knew he was staring, but could not seem to stop himself from drinking in every detail of this alien woman who somehow made his heart race like he was a teenager again. Then her lips curved into a smile, and Marcus realized with horror that she had caught him staring and was amused by it, and her skin shifted from blue to gold, which according to his briefing files meant something significant, but he could not remember what, because his brain had stopped working properly. The reception continued, with various officials making polite conversation, and Marcus tried to focus on his job as one of the cultural liaisons, whose actual purpose was to observe and report on Vel's social dynamics, but he kept finding his gaze drawn back to the princess, who seemed to be having her own quiet conversation with her father's advisors near the throne. What Marcus noticed was that every time an advisor spoke, the princess would lean in and whisper something to another official, and that official would then correct or modify what the first advisor had said, and it happened 3 times in 20 minutes, which seemed like a pattern worth noting. The princess was not just decoration standing by the throne looking pretty for the cameras and dignitaries, but was actively involved in the political machinery of the empire. Even though none of the official briefings Earth received had mentioned her as a significant player in the government, Marcus was making mental notes about this, when suddenly the princess moved and walked directly toward him, and the crowd parted for her automatically, and Marcus felt Ambassador Rodriguez tense beside him, and heard her whisper a curse under her breath in Spanish. Princess Lyra stopped directly in front of Marcus, close enough that he could see the patterns of light that moved beneath her skin, like fiber optic cables carrying data through her body, and she tilted her head slightly, and her smile grew wider. "You were staring at me, human," she said in perfect English without using the standard translator protocol, which meant she had learned the language herself, and her voice had a musical quality that made the words sound like song lyrics instead of speech. Marcus felt every eye in the massive hall turn toward them, and the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees as Vel Nobles registered what was happening, and Ambassador Rodriguez made a small choking sound beside him, and he knew this was a disaster in the making, but something in the princess' eyes told him that honesty might be his only option here. "I was your highness," Marcus said, and felt Rodriguez kick his ankle in warning, but he continued anyway because retreating now would be worse than whatever he was about to say, and he had negotiated enough corporate conflicts to know when boldness was the only path forward through a minefield. "You like what you see, do you not, human?" the princess asked, and her skin flickered between gold and something deeper like amber, and Marcus realized this was the moment that would define everything that came after, and he could play it safe and lie, and probably doom the negotiations, or he could be honest and see where that path led. "Your Highness, I would be lying if I said otherwise," Marcus replied, and heard gasps rippled through the crowd, but he kept going because he was already committed, and sometimes the only way out was through the fire itself, and he had to trust his instincts. "Here, even though they might be completely wrong about everything? But what I find most beautiful," Marcus continued, "is the way you have been quietly correcting your father's advisors all evening. When they underestimate humanity, and intelligence is always attractive no matter what form it takes." The hall went completely silent, and Marcus could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, and wondered if he had just destroyed Earth's chances at a favorable treaty, or possibly started an interstellar incident that would be taught in diplomatic failure classes for the next 1,000 years. Princess Lyra's skin blazed bright amber, and her smile transformed into something genuine and delighted, and she laughed, which sounded like wind chimes in a summer breeze, and Marcus felt the tension in his shoulders ease slightly, because at least she was not offended, even if everyone else in the hall looked horrified. "You are an interesting human," she said, and turned to address the crowd with a voice that carried authority despite her youth and beauty that everyone seemed to think disqualified her from serious consideration in political matters. "This human will serve as my personal liaison for the treaty negotiations," she announced, and chaos erupted in the hall as Vel nobles began shouting protests, and human diplomats started arguing, and the emperor raised his hand for silence, but Lyra ignored all of it and kept her violet eyes locked on Marcus. "We will speak privately later tonight," she said in a voice only he could hear, and then she turned and walked away, leaving Marcus standing in the center of a diplomatic disaster, wondering what exactly he had just gotten himself into, and whether being honest had saved him or doomed him. The reception ended badly, with Vel nobles refusing to speak to the human delegation and Ambassador Rodriguez pulling Marcus aside to demand what he thought he was doing, and threatening to send him back to Earth on the next transport. But before she could finish her tirade, a Vel servant appeared and informed Marcus that Princess Lyra required his presence in the palace gardens immediately. Marcus followed the servant through twisting corridors that seemed designed to confuse outsiders, and emerged into gardens that glowed with plants that produced their own light in shades of blue and purple and green that created shadows and illumination in equal measure. Princess Lyra stood beside a fountain that ran with liquid that was not water, but something thicker and more luminous, and when she turned to face him, her expression was serious, and her skin had shifted to a pale gray that Marcus somehow knew meant concern or fear. "The treaty negotiations are a lie," she said without preamble, and Marcus felt his stomach drop because he had suspected something was wrong, but hearing it confirmed was different and worse than suspicion. "Hardliners in my father's court plan to use your planet's desperation to turn Earth into a vassal state," she continued, and her words came fast, like she was afraid of being overheard, even in this supposedly private garden where alien plants swayed without wind. "They will offer you protection and technology and trade, but the price will be your freedom, and by the time your leaders realize what they signed, Earth will belong to the Vel Empire in everything but name, and your people will be servants pretending to be partners." "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. "Because nothing about this situation made sense, and princesses did not usually betray their own government to warn primitive aliens unless something bigger was happening, because I need an ally. Lyra said, and her skin flickered between gray and amber, like she was cycling between fear and hope. And because humans might be crazy enough to help me stop this, and because when you looked at me, you saw a person first, not a princess or a pretty ornament or a useful tool. Help you do what Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. He was not sure he wanted to hear it confirmed. Stop a conspiracy that has been growing in the Empire for decades. Lyra replied, and her violet eyes burned with intensity. That made Marcus believe every word, she said, even though his logical brain screamed that this could be a trap or a test or something worse. Help me prove that partnership is stronger than domination, she continued, and help me show my father and the Empire that humanity deserves respect, not subjugation, and in return I will make sure Earth gets the treaty you actually need instead of the chains they plan to give you. Marcus looked at this alien princess who had approached him because he stared at her during a diplomatic reception and wondered if this was the stupidest or the smartest decision he would ever make in his life. I am in, he said, because sometimes the only choice is to trust your instincts and hope they lead somewhere better than the obvious path everyone else is following. Part 2. The Princess's Gambit. Marcus met
Ira.
in the bioluminescent gardens 3 nights in a row, where the alien plants cast enough light to see, but created shadows deep enough to hide conversations from security drones that patrolled the palace grounds on predictable routes that Lyra had memorized from years of sneaking away from official functions. The gardens smelled like nothing on Earth, with scents that Marcus could not name, but that made his head feel clearer somehow. And Lyra explained that some of the plants produced compounds that enhanced mental clarity, which was why the gardens had originally been designed for the Emperor's meditation sessions before he stopped coming here decades ago. My father wants peace, Lyra said on the 3rd night, while sitting on a bench carved from crystal that somehow remained comfortable despite being stone, in her skin flickered between blue and gray as she spoke about family and politics in the same breath. He is tired of wars that drain resources and kill citizens for territory that adds nothing but numbers to reports that advisors present at council meetings where everyone pretends the deaths matter, but really they only care about the profit margins. But his military advisors see humanity differently, Marcus prompted, because he was learning to read. Lyra's pauses and silences as much as her words, and he knew she was working up to something that troubled her deeply. They see primitives who stumbled into faster-than-light travel without understanding the political landscape of the galaxy, Lyra explained, and her hands moved as she talked in gestures that seemed universal, even across species barriers. They see a species desperate for protection and technology and trade, who will sign anything to gain access to the Empire's resources, and they are not completely wrong about that because Earth does need what we can offer. But the treaty they have prepared is worse than rejection, Marcus said, because he had seen enough corporate contracts to know when legal language hid chains beneath promises of partnership. The treaty binds Earth to military service for 100 years. Lyra confirmed, and during that time your fleets will fight our wars, and your resources will feed our industrial complexes, and your people will have representation in name only, while real decisions are made by advisors who view you as useful tools, nothing more. How do we stop it? Marcus asked, and watched Lyra's skin shift to amber, which he was learning meant she was moving from worry to action, and that color seemed to be her natural state. When she had a plan forming, the hardliner's power comes from noble houses that profit from military contracts and resource extraction, Lyra explained, and they form a coalition that has controlled imperial policy for 3 generations by making themselves indispensable to the economy. But there are other houses, Marcus said, because he understood political structures even when they were alien and where there was a ruling coalition. There was usually an opposition waiting for opportunity, reform houses that want to end the constant expansion, Lyra confirmed, and they have lost family members in wars that accomplish nothing except enriching the military industrial complex that turns suffering into profit margins. They would support genuine partnership with humanity if they believed your species had value beyond resources and labor. Marcus finished the thought and saw Lyra's smile flash bright in the garden darkness. Exactly, she said, and leaned forward with excitement that made her whole body seem to glow brighter, like her enthusiasm was literally radiating from her skin. Humanity went from planet-bound to faster-than-light travel in 50 years, Lyra continued. And that is unprecedented in galactic history, where most species take centuries to make that transition. If they make it at all because the technological leap is so massive, our rapid advancement is actually remarkable, Marcus said slowly, as understanding dawned and he realized that what Earth saw as embarrassing desperation to catch up might actually be their greatest selling point. It proves adaptability and innovation. Lyra said, and those are traits that have been bred out of most empire species over millennia of stability. We're having the same technology for 10,000 years seems normal because why change what works? The empire has stagnated, Marcus said, and Lyra nodded enthusiastically with her skin blazing gold. We recycle the same solutions to the same problems generation after generation, Lyra explained, and no one questions whether there might be better ways because the current ways are traditional, and tradition is the most powerful force in Vel culture. So we prove that humans think differently, Marcus said, and ideas started forming in his mind about how to demonstrate human value in ways that could not be dismissed as primitive luck. We prove it publicly, Lyra said, and her eyes met his with intensity. That made Marcus suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, and how the light from the plants cast shadows that made her features even more striking. I can arrange for you to address the imperial court under the guise of cultural exchange, Lyra continued, and you will have 1 hour to convince the noble houses that humanity deserves partnership, not subjugation. 1 hour to change the fate of Earth, Marcus said, and felt the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders like physical pressure. 1 hour to show them something they have never seen before, Lyra agreed and reached out to touch his hand, which was the first time they had made physical contact, and Marcus was surprised by how warm her skin felt when he had unconsciously expected it to be cold like a lizard. What if I fail? Marcus asked, because honesty seemed important when the stakes were this high in pretending confidence. He did not feel seemed like a waste of time they did not have. Then Earth becomes a vassal state, and I lose what little political capital I have left, and the hardliners consolidate power, and the Empire continues down a path that leads nowhere. Good, Lyra said, but her skin stayed gold, which Marcus was learning meant confidence despite the dark words. Why are you risking so much for us? Marcus asked, and the question had been building in him for 3 nights because nothing about Lyra's choice made sense from a political standpoint. Because you saw me, Lyra said simply, and her skin shifted too. A color Marcus had not seen before, something like rose gold that seemed to indicate vulnerability or deep emotion. In that reception hall, surrounded by hundreds of beings who have known me my entire life, you were the only one who looked at me and saw a person instead of a princess, or a pretty decoration, or a decoration, or a useful connection to the Emperor. You were also correcting advisors and clearly involved in actual policy, Marcus pointed out, because he wanted her to know he had noticed her intelligence before her beauty, even if the beauty had caught his attention first. Which no one else noticed, Lyra said with a laugh that sounded both sad and amused at once, and her skin flickered between colors like she could not settle on a single emotion. My father loves me, but sees me as his daughter, not his advisor, she continued, and the noble houses respect my bloodline, but not my mind, and the hardliners view me as a problem to be managed through marriage alliances and social manipulation. You are 4th in line for the throne, Marcus said, remembering her official position in the succession, which means, I have royal authority but no real expectation of ruling, Lyra explained, so I have freedom to pursue interests that my siblings do. Nod and I have used that freedom to study economics and military theory and political philosophy in 17 different disciplines. You are more qualified than most of the advisors, Marcus said, and Lyra's skin blazed amber with pleasure at the recognition, but qualifications matter less than gender and birth order in the Empire, Lyra said, and her tone carried centuries of frustration, compressed into a few words that resonated with Marcus, because Earth had its own history of similar prejudices. We are not so different, Lyra said quietly, and looked up at the alien sky where unfamiliar constellations wheeled overhead, and Marcus followed her gaze, wondering if Earth's sun was visible from here. Both underestimated. Marcus agreed, and both trying to prove we are more than others expect. The moment stretched between them filled with recognition that went beyond species or culture, and when Lyra looked back at Marcus, something had shifted in her expression that made his heart rate increase for reasons that had nothing to do with political intrigue. "I've never met anyone who treated me as an equal first, Marcus," she said, and used his name for the first time without his title. And the intimacy of that small change felt significant. "I have never met anyone who challenged me the way you do, Lyra," Marcus replied, and noticed that the space between them had decreased, though he was not sure which of them had moved closer. They sat in the garden as night deepened, and talked about everything except the treaty, and Marcus learned that Lyra loved music, but could not carry a tune, and that she had once snuck out of the palace to attend a street festival and gotten into trouble for dancing with common citizens. Lyra learned that Marcus had mediated peace talks during the corporate wars on Mars, where competing companies had nearly destroyed the colony over mining rights, and that he chose diplomacy because his brother died in one of those corporate conflicts. And he decided that talking had to be better than fighting. The conversation felt easy in a way that made ours pass like minutes, and when Lyra finally said she needed to return before her absence was noted, Marcus felt genuine disappointment that their time together was ending. "Tomorrow I speak to my father about arranging your address to the court," Lyra said, as they walked back through gardens that had grown darker as even the bioluminescent plants dimmed their light for something like sleep. "Tomorrow I start preparing the speech that might save my planet," Marcus said, and tried not to think about the impossible weight of that responsibility. "Tomorrow we start changing the empire," Lyra said, and her skin glowed soft gold in the darkness like a beacon of hope in uncertain times. They reached the entrance to the palace, where they would separate and return to their respective quarters, and Lyra turned to face Marcus with an expression that seemed to carry questions she was not quite ready to ask. "Thank you for seeing me, Marcus," she said, and Marcus understood. She meant more than just the literal seeing, but the deeper recognition of who she was beneath the titles and expectations. "Thank you for trusting me, Lyra," he replied, and meant it because trust was the foundation of everything they were attempting. Marcus returned to his quarters, expecting to sleep, but instead lay awake thinking about alien princesses and impossible speeches, and the strange twist of fate that had brought him from staring at a beautiful woman to planning the future of human civilization. The next morning, a messenger arrived at dawn with news that made Marcus's blood run cold, and he rushed to find Lyra, who looked pale gray, which he now knew meant fear. "My father summoned me last night," she said without preamble, and her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, which was the first time Marcus had seen her show physical signs of distress. "The hardliners know we are planning something," she continued, "and they have moved up their timeline, and tomorrow, after you speak, they plan to present evidence that Earth has been secretly militarizing, which will justify immediate occupation." "Evidence?" Marcus asked, and felt his stomach twist, because he knew whatever the hardliners had prepared would be convincing whether it was true or not. "Fabricated, but believable," Lyra confirmed, "and my father is already suspicious because someone has been spreading rumors about your planet's military capabilities and defense preparations, so I have one shot to convince the court before they see manufactured proof that Earth is a threat," Marcus said, and understood that the stakes had just increased beyond what he thought possible. "One shot to change everything," Lyra agreed, and her skin flickered rapidly between gray and amber like she was cycling between fear and determination, trying to decide which emotion would serve them better. "Then I better make it count," Marcus said, and surprised himself by reaching out to take Lyra's hand in a gesture of reassurance that crossed cultural boundaries. 'Cause some things were universal, even between species. Lyra looked down at their joined hands, and her skin slowly shifted from gray to gold, and when she looked up at Marcus, her expression carried something that might have been hope, or might have been something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. "We do this together," she said, and Marcus nodded because facing impossible odds felt less terrifying when someone else believed in you enough to risk everything alongside you. Part 3. The human factor Marcus stood in the preparation chamber wearing formal clothes that the human delegation had brought, specifically for important occasions, and his hands shook slightly as he reviewed notes that suddenly seemed inadequate for the task ahead of him, or 1 hour would determine if Earth became a partner or a puppet in an empire that spanned hundreds of worlds. Ambassador Rodriguez had tried to stop him that morning with arguments about protocol and proper channels and the danger of letting one person speak for an entire planet, but Lyra had intervened with royal authority that could not be questioned even by Earth's chief diplomat. The Imperial Court chamber was massive beyond anything Marcus had imagined, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows or maybe into the sky itself, because the architecture seemed to blend indoor and outdoor spaces in ways that defied his understanding of how buildings should work. Noble houses sat in sections organized by some hierarchy Marcus did not understand, with the most powerful families closest to the throne and the lesser houses arranged in descending circles that created an amphitheater effect where everyone could see the speaker platform at the center. Marcus counted representatives from at least 20 different species in the audience, and each being studied him with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt to outright hostility. Because humanity's reputation as primitive newcomers had preceded them, the hardliners sat in the front row with skin colors that remained constant deep reds and purples that Lyra had taught him meant confidence bordering on arrogance, and their eyes tracked Marcus with predatory focus that made his instincts scream warnings about danger. Princess Lyra sat beside her father on a smaller throne with her spine straight and her skin carefully neutral silver that gave away nothing of her emotions, even though Marcus could see tension in her shoulders that probably no one else would notice. The Emperor raised his hand, and the chamber fell silent, with hundreds of beings stopping their conversations mid-word and focusing tension on the human standing alone on the speaker platform. Marcus Chen of Earth, the Emperor's voice rolled through the chamber with authority accumulated over decades of rule, and you have been granted 1 hour to address this court on behalf of your species and explain why humanity deserves consideration as partners rather than subjects. Marcus took a breath and pushed down the fear that threatened to freeze his voice, and began speaking with words that felt inadequate but were all he had. I could list Earth's resources, he said, and his voice carried through the chamber. Thanks to technology, he did not understand that amplified sound without making it feel artificial. Or I could catalog our military capabilities or promise trade agreements that benefit your economy, but that is not why humans deserve partnership. Marcus continued and saw confusion ripple through the audience, because apparently no one expected him to reject the obvious arguments. Humans deserve partnership because we see things differently, Marcus said and gestured to the assembled nobles from dozens of species, who all looked similar in their formal clothes and careful expressions. Every species in this empire has adapted to Vel culture and Vel methods and Vel solutions, because that is how empires work, where the dominant power shapes everyone else in their image. There were murmurs at that, because apparently pointing out cultural domination was not typical diplomatic behavior, but Marcus pressed on because safe speeches would not save Earth. But adaptation means losing something, Marcus said, and what gets lost is the different perspective that comes from solving problems your own way. He pulled up a holographic display that Lyra had helped him prepare, showing technical diagrams of Vel energy distribution systems that powered their cities and ships and infrastructure across hundreds of worlds. This is elegant engineering, Marcus said honestly, and it works flawlessly and has worked for thousands of years, which is why no one questions it anymore. But during my 2 weeks on Velshara, I worked with human engineers back on Earth via quantum communications, Marcus continued, and we studied your systems with fresh eyes that see inefficiency where you see tradition. The hologram shifted to show modifications that human engineers were designed based on principles from Earth's experimental fusion reactors and distributed grid systems that looked primitive compared to Vel technology, but approached energy distribution from completely different angles. This modification increases efficiency by 15%, Marcus said, and let that number hang in the air, because 15% across an empire of hundreds of worlds represented massive improvements to quality of life and economic output. It is not revolutionary, Marcus admitted, but it proves that humans see your technology differently than you do, because we do not have thousands of years of assuming. This is the only way things can work. The nobles were leaning forward now with interest replacing contempt in many faces, and Marcus felt momentum building, but knew the hardliners would not let this continue unchallenged. On cue, the chief military advisor stood with skin blazing deep purple, and his voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "Interesting theories from primitive engineers," he said with contempt dripping from every word. "But perhaps we should discuss Earth's actual intentions rather than their minor technical observations." The advisor triggered a holographic display that showed Earth's orbital space, where dozens of ships were under construction in shipyards that ringed the planet like a metal necklace. "These are not the ships of a peaceful species seeking partnership," the advisor declared, "and these are warships being built at a pace that suggests Earth is preparing for conflict, not cooperation." The court erupted in outrage, and Marcus felt his carefully constructed argument crumbling as nobles shouted questions and accusations, and the emperor raised his hand for silence that came slowly and reluctantly. Marcus looked at the images and recognized the ships because he had seen the construction reports, but what the advisors showed looked aggressive and militaristic. When presented without context, "Yes," Marcus said, and his voice cut through the noise, because sometimes the only response to accusations is complete honesty that disarms attack. "Earth has been building ships since we learned that galactic civilization exists," Marcus continued, "and any species would do the same when they discover they are not alone in a universe full of beings, of weapons and technology centuries beyond their own." "But here's the question," Marcus said, and looked directly at the military advisor with steady eyes that refused to show fear, even though his heart was pounding. "If humanity wanted war, why did we send diplomats first?" Marcus asked, and let the question hang in the silence that followed. "Why did Earth send me a negotiator with experience in peace talks instead of sending an admiral with battle plans?" Marcus pressed and saw doubt flicker across some noble faces. Lyra had taught him about Vel history, where every peaceful species sent thinkers and artists and diplomats as first contact, while every conqueror sent warriors and weapons and demands. "In your own history, every species that came in peace sent their best minds to learn and understand." Marcus said, "And every species that came for conquest sent soldiers to intimidate and control. Earth sent scientists and diplomats and cultural liaisons." Marcus continued, "And we sent people who ask questions instead of making demands. And that should tell you our intentions better than ship construction, that is. Defensive preparation, not aggressive expansion." The military advisors started to respond, but Princess Lyra stood, and her movement silenced the chamber, because royalty speaking always commanded attention. "I invoked the right of tribunal of merit." Lyra's voice rang clear and strong through the chamber, and gasps echoed from the assembled nobles, because apparently this was significant. Marcus remembered the ancient law that Lyra had explained, where any royal could demand that competing visions for the empire's future be tested through demonstration rather than decided through debate. The hardliners accept Princess Lyra's challenge. The military advisor said too quickly, which meant he had been prepared for this possibility and had a counter ready. "We will demonstrate the empire's strength through military exercises." The advisor continued, "and show why. Expansion through power has built our civilization, and we will demonstrate partnership's value through solving real problems," Lyra countered, and her skin blazed gold with confidence that Marcus hoped was not just for show. The emperor looked between his daughter and his advisors with an expression that Marcus could not read, and finally nodded acceptance of terms that would bind him to honor the results. 3 days, the emperor declared, and then both sides will present their demonstrations before this court, and the noble houses will vote on which vision should guide our future. The court session ended with nobles clustering in groups to discuss what had just happened, and Marcus felt hands pulling him away from the center platform toward a private chamber where Lyra waited with skin flickering rapidly between colors. "That was brilliant," she said, and pulled Marcus into an embrace that surprised him before she stepped back, with skin flushing amber with embarrassment at the spontaneous gesture. That was terrifying, Marcus corrected, but allowed himself to feel relief that the first part was over, even though the hardest part still lay ahead. 3 days to prepare a demonstration that proves partnership with humanity offers something conquest never could, Lyra said, and sat down heavily on a bench with exhaustion showing in her posture. "What will the hardliners demonstrate?" Marcus asked, even though he suspected he knew the answer. Military might and tactical superiority and overwhelming force, Lyra replied, and everything that has made the Empire powerful for centuries. And what will we demonstrate? Marcus asked, and looked at Lyra, who met his eyes with determination that burned bright despite her obvious fatigue. That humans can solve problems the Empire has struggled with for decades, Lyra said, and that fresh perspectives and different approaches and genuine partnership create value that domination can never achieve. No pressure, then, Marcus said, and was rewarded with Lyra's laugh that sounded like music even when she was tired. They spent the rest of that day and all of the next planning their demonstration, with Lyra calling in quiet favors from reform-minded scientists and Marcus coordinating with human engineers who worked around the clock on Earth to develop solutions to the problem they had chosen. The frontier colonies had suffered from resource shortages for decades because supply chains stretched thin across vast distances, and the hardliners' only solution had always been to conquer more resources, rather than use existing resources better. Marcus and Lyra proposed something radical, combining human vertical farming with VEL environmental technology and human distributed logistics, with VEL faster-than-light capabilities and human improvisation with VEL precision. On the second night, while reviewing simulation results that showed promise but needed refinement, Lyra reached across the table and took
Marcus's hand.
"Thank you," she said simply, and Marcus understood she meant thank you for taking this risk, and thank you for seeing her, and thank you for believing that partnership could work when everyone else seemed committed to conflict. "Thank you for trusting me," Marcus replied and squeezed her hand gently because words felt inadequate for expressing what he felt in that moment where two beings from different worlds worked together to build something better than what existed. The third day arrived too quickly, and Marcus stood in the Imperial arena, watching the hardliners demonstrate military precision that was genuinely impressive, with fleet formations that moved like flowing water and firepower that could reduce planets to rubble. The crowd cheered because power was seductive and easy to understand, while partnership required imagination to see value that was less obvious. Then it was their turn, and Marcus took the stage with Lyra beside him, and they presented their solution to the colony problem, showing simulations where human and VEL technology merged to create something neither species could achieve alone. The colonies became self-sufficient within 2 years in the simulation and began producing surplus within 5 years, which eliminated the resource pressure that drove constant expansion. But Marcus pushed further, showing economic models that proved the hardliners' military-industrial complex profited from scarcity and conflict, which meant they had financial incentives to maintain problems rather than solve them. "How many wars exist because they are profitable?" Marcus asked the assembled nobles. "And how many citizens have died so that military contractors can increase quarterly earnings?" An elderly duchess stood with skin pale gray and tears streaming down her face, and she spoke of a grandson who died taking a mineral-rich world that turned out to have minerals worth less than the cost of the invasion. "How many more children must die for their profit margins?" the Duchess asked, and her words hit harder than any military demonstration. Other nobles began standing and speaking, and Marcus saw the tide turning as reform houses found courage to voice frustrations they had suppressed for generations. The military advisor made his fatal mistake, then attacking Princess Lyra personally, calling her a naive child corrupted by primitive infatuation and suggesting she was unfit for authority. Marcus did not think before stepping forward to defend her, calling for truth instead of insults and systematically dismantling every lie the hardliners had told using data that Lyra had helped him gather over weeks. He revealed secret accounts and falsified reports and manipulated intelligence, showing that the hardliners had engineered conflicts for profit for decades, while citizens died and families suffered. The Emperor's skin blazed purple that Marcus now understood meant rage and betrayal, and he stripped the hardliners of positions and ordered investigations. The real negotiations could begin finally, with honest terms and genuine partnership. and Earth would join the Empire as equals with representation and protection and respect. Part 4. When humans get creative. The Imperial arena filled with beings. From every corner of the Empire, where noble houses and common citizens alike gathered to witness the tribunal of merit, that would determine humanity's fate and possibly reshape the political structure that had governed countless worlds for centuries. Marcus stood in the preparation area watching feeds of the arena floor, where the hardliners were setting up equipment for their military demonstration, and he tried not to think about the fact that billions of lives depended on what happened in the next few hours. Lyra paced beside him with skin cycling through colors so rapidly it created a rainbow effect that would have been beautiful if it did not signal her extreme anxiety about whether their plan would work or collapse under pressure. Ambassador Rodriguez had tried one last time that morning to convince Marcus to withdraw from the demonstration with arguments about letting professional diplomats handle negotiations, but Marcus had politely refused because backing out now would signal weakness and destroy any credibility Earth had built. The hardliners went first, as was traditional for the challenging party, and Marcus watched with everyone else as Vel military forces executed maneuvers that showcased centuries of tactical refinement. Fleet formations moved with perfect synchronization, where hundreds of ships acted as one organism flowing through space, like schools of fish that never collided despite moving at impossible speeds. Weapons demonstrations turned asteroids to dust with precision strikes that hit targets millions of kilometers away, and the raw power on display made it clear why the Vel Empire had dominated this region of space for longer than human civilization had existed. Ground forces performed urban combat simulations that showed how Vel soldiers could take any city with minimal casualties while maximizing devastation to enemy positions, and the efficiency was terrifying in its calculated brutality. The crowd cheered, and Marcus felt his confidence waver, because how could partnership compete with power that could reshape worlds, and how could cooperation match domination that had proven effective for millennia? The hardliners finished with a presentation showing conquest statistics where graphs demonstrated steady empire growth through military expansion and resource acquisition that had enriched noble houses and strengthened central authority. This is the Vel way, the military advisor declared with skin-blazing, confident purple, and this is what has made us great and what will continue to make us greater as we expand across the galaxy. Then it was time, and Marcus walked onto the arena floor with Lyra beside him, and he could feel millions of eyes watching through direct attendance and broadcast feeds that reached every world in the Empire. We could show you similar demonstrations, Marcus began, and his voice carried through the arena, thanks to amplification technology that made him sound confident even though his hands wanted to shake. We could present Earth's military capabilities, or promise resources, or make threats. Disguised as defensive postures, Marcus continued, and all of that would be expected, and all of that would be boring because it is what everyone does. Instead, we are going to show you something different, Marcus said, and triggered the holographic display that filled the arena floor with a three-dimensional simulation of the frontier colonies where resource scarcity had caused suffering for decades. This is a real problem that has plagued the Empire for generations, Marcus explained, and the hardliners' solution has always been to conquer more resources and extend supply chains further and repeat the cycle that creates new problems while solving old ones temporarily. The display shifted, showing the current system where resources traveled thousands of light years from core worlds to frontier colonies in a logistics network that was impressive but ultimately unsustainable. We propose something radical, Marcus said, and Lyra stepped forward to begin the technical presentation that combined human and Vel expertise in ways that neither species had considered
Before.
Human vertical farming techniques merged with Vel environmental control technology to create food production systems that could operate in hostile environments where traditional agriculture failed. Human distributed network theory combined with Vel faster-than-light communication to create supply chain management that adapted in real time to changing needs. Rather than following rigid predetermined routes, human improvisation and adaptability integrated with Vel precision engineering to create systems that could be modified quickly. When unexpected problems arose, instead of requiring years of redesign, the simulation played, showing the frontier colonies transforming over 5 years from dependent outposts into self-sufficient communities that contributed to the empire rather than draining resources. But Marcus went further, showing economic models that revealed uncomfortable truths about who benefited from keeping the colonies dependent and struggling. The military-industrial complex profits from scarcity, he said, and pulled up financial records that Lyra had obtained through royal access, showing contracts and transactions that painted a damning picture. Every supply shipment generates fees, and every military escort requires payment, and every resource shortage justifies higher prices. Marcus continued, and the people who profit from this system have no incentive to solve the underlying problems. Your hardliners are not protecting the empire, Marcus said, and looked directly at the military advisor whose skin was turning darker, purple with rage at being exposed. They are protecting their profit margins, he finished, and let that accusation hang in the shocked silence that followed. The nobles began murmuring, and Marcus could see the shift happening as generations of frustration found voice in reform-minded houses realized they were not alone in questioning the status quo. An elderly duchess stood with skin pale gray that signaled deep emotion, and her voice trembled as she spoke about losing a grandson in a war over mineral rights on a distant world. He died taking a planet that turned out to have resources worth less than the cost of the invasion, she said, and her pain was raw and real in a way that statistics could never capture. How many more children must die so military contractors can show quarterly growth, the Duchess asked, and her question echoed through the arena with devastating effect. Other nobles began standing and speaking, and each story added weight to the case. Marcus and Lyra were building where personal tragedy gave meaning to abstract economics. The military advisor saw his support crumbling and made the mistake of attacking directly with words meant to wound rather than persuade. Princess Lyra is a naive child, corrupted by primitive infatuation, the advisor declared with contempt dripping from every word, and she is unfit for authority if she believes partnership with humans offers anything except weakness disguised as cooperation. The arena went silent because attacking royalty directly was violation of protocol that bordered on treason, and Marcus felt rage surge through him at the disrespect aimed at Lyra, who had risked everything. Marcus stepped forward before Lyra could respond because she had already taken enough political damage, and he needed to protect her the way she had protected him. The advisor is afraid, Marcus said, and his voice carried quiet intensity that commanded tension better than shouting ever could. He is afraid that humans will expose the lies. He has built his power on, Marcus continued, and he is afraid that partnership will prove more effective than domination. And most of all, he is afraid that Princess Lyra is smarter and braver than he ever was. Then Marcus began systematic destruction of every argument the hardliners had made, using data that Lyra had helped him compile over weeks of secret investigation. He revealed secret accounts in neutral banks, where military contractors deposited profits from wars they had engineered through false intelligence and manufactured threats. He showed falsified reports where resource shortages were exaggerated to justify expansion into territories that turned out to have minimal value. He presented communication records proving that hardliners had manipulated the emperor's advisors to suppress reform proposals that threatened their business model. Each revelation hit like a hammer blow, and the military advisor's skin shifted from purple to gray as confidence transformed into fear, and Marcus pressed his advantage. Princess Lyra has more integrity in one conversation than you have shown in decades of service, Marcus declared, and if she is naive for believing in partnership, then what does it say about you that corruption and profit matter more than citizen lives? The emperor rose from his throne with skin blazing deep purple that signaled rage at betrayal, and his voice shook the arena when he spoke. Strip them of rank and position, the emperor commanded, and his guard moved immediately to detain the military advisor and his closest allies, who had stood exposed before the entire empire. Investigate every contract and every war authorization and every resource claim, the emperor continued, and anyone found guilty of manipulating policy for personal profit will face full legal consequences. The arena erupted in chaos with nobles shouting and citizens cheering and reporters scrambling to document everything while Marcus stood beside Lyra, who was trembling with relief and exhaustion. The Emperor turned his attention to Marcus and Lyra, and his expression softened, though his skin still showed traces of angry purple. "You have shown me that my trust was misplaced in advisors, who saw my authority as tool for their enrichment," the Emperor said, "and you have done service to the Empire that deserves recognition and reward. Earth will be offered genuine partnership," the Emperor declared, "and the terms will reflect mutual respect and shared benefit, and human representatives will have full voice in Imperial Council deliberations." The crowd cheered, and Marcus felt weight lift from his shoulders that he had carried since arriving on Velshara, where one mistake could have doomed his entire species. Lyra's skin blazed gold that signaled joy and triumph, and when she turned to Marcus, her smile was brighter than any bioluminescent plant in the palace gardens. "We did it," she whispered, and Marcus nodded because words seemed inadequate for the magnitude of what they had just accomplished together. The formal proceedings continued for another hour with new treaties drafted and provisional agreements signed and diplomatic protocols established, but Marcus barely registered any of it because his mind was still processing everything that had happened. When they finally escaped to a private balcony overlooking the crystalline city, Marcus leaned against the railing and watched 3 alien suns set over a world that no longer felt quite so foreign. Lyra stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched and her skin glowed soft amber in the fading light. "Thank you for defending me," she said quietly, and Marcus understood. She meant more than just the public defense, but the deeper act of seeing her worth and standing up for her when she could not stand up for herself without appearing defensive. "Thank you for trusting me with something this important," Marcus replied, and meant every word because Lyra had given him opportunity to help save both their peoples. The moment stretched between them filled with awareness that went beyond gratitude or partnership, and when Marcus turned to face Lyra, he found her already looking at him with expression that made his heart race. "I never expected this," she said, and gestured vaguely at the space between them, where something had grown that neither had planned. Neither did Marcus admitted, and thought about how catching him staring had led to conspiracy and revolution and standing together against corruption. Lyra reached up and touched his face with fingers that were warm and gentle, and her skin shifted to that rose gold color that meant vulnerability and deep emotion. "Is this allowed?" Marcus asked, because he still did not fully understand cultural boundaries around relationships and species mixing. "I am a princess," Lyra said with a smile that held mischief and defiance in equal measure, "and I just helped overthrow corrupt advisors, so I think I can decide who I kiss." Then she kissed him, and the universe narrowed to just that moment where 2 beings from different worlds connected in a way that transcended biology and politics and all the reasons this should not work. When they finally pulled apart, Lyra was laughing with skin blazing gold, and Marcus felt happier than he had any right to feel given the political chaos they had just unleashed. "Tomorrow we travel to the imperial capital," she said, and her expression grew serious, though her skin stayed gold, because the Senate must ratify the partnership treaty. "Just a formality, right?" Marcus asked, though instinct warned him that nothing in galactic politics was ever just a formality. "Should be."
Right.
Lyra agreed, but her skin flickered briefly to gray before returning to gold, and Marcus caught the fear she tried to hide. Part 5. The Human Way Forward, The Journey to the Imperial Capital took 3 days through faster-than-light corridors that bent space in ways that made Marcus's head hurt when he tried to understand the physics, and during that time rumors spread faster than their ship could travel. Senator Vexker, who controlled the Senate's scheduling, had been the hardliner's silent partner for decades, and now he was spinning narratives that painted Princess Lyra as compromised by human manipulation and Marcus as an intelligence operative sent to destabilize the Empire from within. The messages reached them through encrypted channels where Lyra's allies in the Reform faction warned that the ratification vote was being transformed from routine approval into something much more dangerous. Ambassador Rodriguez contacted Marcus via quantum communication, with face tight with worry and voice sharp with frustration at how quickly the political situation was deteriorating. Half the Senate believes you seduced the princess to gain influence, she said bluntly, and the other half thinks Lyra is using you to advance her own political ambitions, and neither narrative helps. Earth's position. What do they want me to do, Marcus? Asked, though he already knew the answer would be something he could not accept. Step back and let professional diplomats handle the final negotiations, Rodriguez said, and her tone suggested she knew. Marcus would refuse, but had to make the attempt anyway. If I step back now, it proves the rumors that I was manipulating events. Marcus replied, and it makes Lyra look weak for trusting me, and it destroys all the credibility we built. Rodriguez sighed with exhaustion that came from weeks of diplomatic crisis management and finally nodded acceptance of reality. She could not change. Then do not fail, she said, and ended the transmission, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of an entire planet's future resting on his shoulders. The imperial capital made Velshara look like a provincial outpost where buildings stretched toward the sky in impossible geometries that seemed to defy gravity, and the population numbered in billions across a city that covered an entire continent. Marcus and Lyra arrived to find protests outside the Senate building where citizens held signs in languages Marcus could not read, but whose sentiments were clear from the angry faces and raised voices. Some protesters supported human partnership and carried banners showing Earth and Velshara, connected by bridges of light, but others demanded the Empire maintain traditional values and reject primitive influence. The Senate chamber itself was even more impressive than the imperial court, with seating for thousands of senators who represented worlds across, hundreds of star systems, and the air hummed with translation technology that converted hundreds of languages into something everyone could understand. Senator Vexker presided from the central podium with skin displaying deep purple confidence, and his opening remarks made clear that this would not be the simple ratification everyone had expected. We gather today to consider whether the Empire should embrace radical change or maintain the strong traditional values that have ensured our prosperity for millennia, Vexker declared, and his words were chosen carefully to frame the vote as existential question about identity. Marcus watched senators react and saw too many nodding in agreement with the framing that turned partnership into betrayal. Of everything the Empire represented, Lyra sat beside him in the gallery reserved for royal observers, and her skin cycled. Through colors that revealed her anxiety, no matter how composed, her expression remained. We cannot win a straight vote, Marcus whispered, and Lyra nodded agreement because they had both studied the Senate composition and counted the votes they did not have. So we changed the conversation. Lyra whispered back and squeezed his hand briefly. Before standing to invoke her right as royalty to address the Senate, the chamber fell silent as Princess Lyra made her way to the speaker platform where thousands of eyes tracked her movement with expressions ranging from sympathy to hostility. Senators have expressed concerns about humanity and partnership and change, Lyra said, and her voice remained steady despite the hostile audience, and I propose we address those concerns directly through open forum. Open forum meant any senator could voice objections and questions without the usual filters of protocol and decorum, and Marcus saw Vexker smile because he thought Lyra had just made a fatal tactical error. The forum lasted 3 brutal hours. Where senators unleashed every fear and prejudice, humans were too primitive, too aggressive, too unpredictable, too different, and underneath the polite language lay centuries of cultural superiority that viewed any species as automatically inferior. Marcus sat in the gallery and listened to a species described as barely evolved barbarians who stumbled into space through accident rather than achievement, and whose only value was as labor force for Empire industries. Some concerns were legitimate. Questions about how integration would work and whether cultural differences could be bridged, but others were pure bigotry dressed in academic language. When the senators finally exhausted their complaints, Lyra returned to the platform with Marcus beside her, and together they faced the assembled representatives of galactic power. "Thank you for your honesty," Marcus said, and surprised everyone by leading with gratitude instead of defensiveness, because attacking back would only entrench positions. "Everything you said is true," Marcus continued, and saw confusion ripple through the Senate. because apparently admitting flaws was not standard political strategy. Humans are primitive by your standards and aggressive when threatened and unpredictable, because we do not follow the same cultural patterns Vel species do, Marcus said, and we are definitely different in ways that make integration challenging. Then he paused and let the silence stretch until senators began to shift, uncomfortably in their seats, wondering where this admission was leading. But is that not exactly what the Empire needs? Marcus asked, and his voice gained strength as he moved into the argument he and Lyra had prepared during the journey. Every species in this empire thinks like Vel, because that is what empires do, where dominant culture shapes everyone else in its image, Marcus said, and you have created unity through uniformity. But uniformity means stagnation, Marcus continued, and when everyone thinks the same way, you recycle the same solutions to the same problems and innovation dies, because no one questions whether there might be better approaches. He pulled up displays showing technological development across the empire, where advancement had slowed to incremental improvements rather than revolutionary breakthroughs. Your faster-than-light drives have not changed fundamentally in 3,000 years, Marcus pointed out. And your energy systems use the same basic principles they used when the Empire was founded, because they work, a senator shouted. And if it works, why change it? Because better exists even when good enough seems sufficient, Marcus replied, and pulled up the energy efficiency improvements that human engineers had found in Vel systems. You did not see these improvements because you stopped looking, Marcus said. Gently, and you stopped looking because centuries of success made you confident that your way was the only way. Lyra stepped forward to continue the argument they had woven together like a duet, where each voice supported and amplified the other. I propose that Earth be the first partner under a new model, Lyra said, and her skin blazed gold with conviction that made her seem to glow. Not conquest, where we absorb and dominate, Lyra continued, but genuine partnership, where we respect differences and learn from each other and grow stronger through diversity rather than uniformity. She shared her vision for an empire, celebrated different approaches, and encouraged innovation through cross-cultural collaboration and measured success by citizen well-being rather than territorial expansion. The Senate chamber filled with murmurs, and Marcus could see the debate shifting as reform-minded senators found courage to voice support they had kept silent before. Then Marcus did something unprecedented by sharing personal stories about his grandmother who survived resource wars and his colleague who brokered peace on Mars and the human capacity for forgiveness that rebuilt civilization after every disaster. We fail constantly, Marcus admitted, and our history is full of mistakes and conflicts and terrible decisions that cost millions of lives. But we also rebuild and learn and try again. Marcus continued, and we believe that making mistakes while attempting something better is preferable to maintaining systems that work but prevent growth. He told them about meeting Lyra and how a moment of honest attraction became honest respect, became genuine. Partnership built on seeing each other as complete beings rather than useful tools. If a human and a Vel princess can find common ground, imagine what our civilizations could build together, Marcus said, and his voice carried emotion that could not be faked. Senator Vexker made his final attempt, claiming that emotional appeals proved humans were manipulative and calling for immediate traditional vote before senators were further influenced. But the old admiral who Marcus remembered from Velshera stood with skin showing colors that indicated she was about to break with tradition. I came prepared to vote no, she said, and her voice carried weight of decades of military service and conservative values that everyone respected. She told the story of her fleet, encountering a human merchant ship in distress and stopping to help, against regulations, and spending 3 days with the human crew who shared everything they had. Those humans were grateful and generous and funny, she said, and for 3 days my crew laughed and learned and connected with beings who thought completely differently than we do. Maybe the Empire has forgotten that strength is not just power, the Admiral continued, and maybe we have become so focused on dominating others that we forgot how to actually connect with them. She voted yes, and her defection broke the dam as moderate senators found permission to follow their conscience rather than political pressure. The vote was close enough that Marcus held his breath until the final count was announced. But enough senators were willing to take the risk on something new. Earth was officially welcomed as an equal partner, the first species granted that status in 400 years, and the chamber erupted in noise that was equal parts celebration and protest. Marcus and Lyra stood together on the balcony overlooking the capital city while ships from both Earth and the Empire patrolled the skies in formations that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. The Emperor had appointed Lyra as Imperial Ambassador for Human Integration with authority to shape how the partnership developed, and Marcus as Earth's chief representative with power to negotiate directly on humanity's behalf. "We are going to be working together for a long time," Lyra said, and her skin glowed warm amber that Marcus had learned meant joy, mixed with anticipation. "I can think of worse fates," Marcus replied, and pulled her close in an embrace that still felt new and slightly awkward across the physical differences between their species. "Do you ever think about that first moment?" Lyra asked, and her voice carried amusement and affection in equal measure. "When I caught you staring at me during the reception," Lyra continued, "and you looked so guilty and so honest all at once." "I think about it constantly," Marcus admitted and marveled at how that single moment of attraction had cascaded into changing the entire political structure of an empire. "Thank you for seeing me," Lyra said, and repeated the words she had said before. But they felt different now, weighted with everything they had accomplished together. "Thank you for trusting me," Marcus replied, and kissed her as 3 alien suns set over a capital city where human and Vel children would someday play together without understanding why anyone ever thought their differences mattered more than their similarities. Marcus sent a final message to Earth that night, while Lyra slept beside him in quarters that were slowly becoming their shared space. He told Ambassador Rodriguez, and through her the entire planet, that humanity had earned their place among the stars not through superior weapons or advanced technology, but by being undeniably themselves. He wrote about human adaptability and fresh perspectives and emotional intelligence and the courage to be vulnerable and honest, even when outmatched by beings who had explored the galaxy for millennia. The message concluded with observation that made Marcus smile as he typed the words into the communication system. "We stumbled into space by accident and met aliens who had every reason to see us as primitives, and somehow we convinced them that being human was valuable exactly because we are human, not in spite of it. That," he wrote, "is the most humanity thing of all, where our greatest strength is not pretending to be something we are not, but embracing what makes us different and showing that difference creates value." Marcus looked out at the city where lights sparkled like stars against the darkness and felt hope for a future where Earth and the Empire would build something neither could achieve alone. Beside him, Lyra stirred and her skin glowed soft silver. In the darkness, and when she opened her eyes and smiled, Marcus knew that sometimes the best things in life began with an honest moment of being caught staring. The Empire was changing, and Earth was rising, and together they would prove that partnership built on genuine respect and shared vision could accomplish what conquest and domination never could. And it all started because an alien princess caught a human staring, and instead of looking away, she smiled and asked if he liked what he saw, and he told the truth.